Good morning. Really? Come on. Good morning. Now we're talking. All right. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for coming back from the break. As Nir not so subtly hinted, I have some new stuff to talk about today. Apparently, it does magic. I will do my best to explain magic to you today. Now, I think a lot of innovations certainly happen with the advent of something new, but also they happen through the iteration process that we're constantly going through with everything we do in the platform. And so I also want to share with you a number of updates that I think are particularly important relative to what we're trying to accomplish from a security perspective. And so to get started, I'd like to provide just a little bit of context for updates, for what's coming new, and all the new services. So I'm going to start with a diagram that some of you who were here at Ignite last year will remember. This is essentially the framework that we think about when we think about how to prevent successful cyber attacks. And at least at a high level, it's very simple. It starts with having complete visibility, because without that visibility, you can't secure what you don't see. And from that visibility, we exert control. We reduce the attack surface down to something that can actually be secured. From there, we prevent everything we already know to be bad, which then sets us up for the fourth and sometimes hardest challenge, which is detecting the attacks we've never seen before, and ideally preventing them as well. And we think if we can do these four things at very high efficacy, we will be successful. Now, it takes a lot of capabilities to actually accomplish these four main elements. If you just look at visibility, all of the things we have to do to understand applications, to understand users, to understand devices, to look inside of encrypted traffic, to do this on endpoints and networks and cloud and SaaS, central sites and branch offices, mobile users, it's hard. And that's just to get the visibility necessary to then exert control, which increasingly needs to be automated with a number of new tools, and then just to understand everything that's already known to be bad in order to be able to block it. It's not necessarily easy. And in order for this to work, every single one of these capabilities has to be really great. And increasingly, for each capability to be great, they need to be integrated with every other capability. But that's what it takes. That's what it takes to build a prevention-oriented platform to prevent successful cyber attacks. And that is what we do every morning when we wake up, is we think about this picture and how we do a better and better job. Now, there's three main aspects of this that I want to share with you today, that I want to spend time on going through how we think about it and what we're doing to get better and better. The first is focused on prevention, and it's very simple. If we can detect an attack, we would like to prevent the attack. Increasingly, that requires scale, leverage, and agility. And for any of this to work, we have to make sure we can apply it consistently in all locations. Because if we don't do that, the seams that exist, if we don't apply in all locations, the seams are where the attacks will get through. So for the next 40 minutes or so, I'd like to focus on these three main areas. So start with prevention. Preventing known attacks by itself is actually relatively difficult. And then to actually have the goal of preventing zero-day attacks, attacks that have never been seen before, is even more challenging. But from my perspective, I think of this not so much as a technology, but a mindset. The mindset that says we can actually get better and better and better at not only detecting the new attacks, but turning that detection into prevention. Not because we'll necessarily get to 100%, but because if we don't try, we for sure will not do a very good job of this. And so we will constantly try. We will constantly get better. We will constantly improve. And if we are successful in this, we will make it more expensive, more difficult, and more time-consuming for attackers to launch successful attacks. And I believe if we do that, we can change the economics of security like never before. So I'd like to talk about a few things that we're doing relative to prevention, and specifically relative to preventing attacks we've never seen before. And I think it's appropriate that we start on the endpoint. The endpoint offers a unique opportunity to not only detect attacks that have never been seen before, but to prevent them. And if we think about this very simply, almost every attack, almost every successful cyber attack, I should say, at some point is going to go through at least one endpoint. One workstation, one server, a mobile device, but somewhere in that attack lifecycle, they are going to pass through an endpoint and they are going to compromise it. And their goal will to be able to run malicious code, something that gives them a foothold by which to carry out the rest of the attack. Now, as we and the rest of the industry have gotten better and better at preventing what I'll call traditional commodity malware, attackers have changed. They morph that malware faster and faster, to the point where we see tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of unique pieces of malware every day. They've clearly gotten very good at this. We see them building targeted malware. It's gotten easier and easier to do this. There's toolkits available. For a couple $100, there's a toolkit available to build targeted malware. It's easy and cheap for them to do this. And they're finding new formats for delivering malware. They're delivering in the form of macros, in the form of scripts, and other things that are not traditional executable files. And then to make their job easier, they are increasingly leveraging vulnerability exploits to bypass any user interaction that might have previously been required in order to get the malware running. And to make that even more challenging, they're finding ways to use exploits to launch fileless attacks so that they don't even have to get to the malware stage. Now, what does this all tell us? It tells us that we need multiple methods of prevention on the endpoint in order to take advantage of that opportunity to detect and prevent attacks. It tells us we need to blend techniques that are focused on zero-day attacks with techniques that are focused on known attacks, because they're different. It tells us we need to make sure we can cover every path that an attacker might take. And it tells us that there's an opportunity to combine as many techniques together as possible to give us as many opportunities as possible to prevent a successful attack on the endpoint. And that is what we do. From a malware prevention perspective, we combine execution restrictions, which I understand might sound fairly conventional and uninteresting. But for example, in the most recent release of Traps, we extended child process protections in order to be able to cover script-based attacks. We've extended the ability to integrate with WildFire such that we can prevent everything that WildFire already knows. Try turning that into signatures and pushing it down to every endpoint. It'll never work. This cloud-based architecture combining endpoint with cloud is the way to solve that problem. We perform machine learning-based local analysis to make sure we can prevent variants of malware that we've seen before. And we combine this up to WildFire for dynamic analysis. And most recently, extended all of these capabilities to cover macro-based attacks as well. And on the exploit side, it's similar. Multiple techniques to cover different aspects of an exploit. Most recently, adding reconnaissance to be able to cover a common technique the exploit kits use, and adding privileged escalation, a technique that we've seen across all operating systems. And we combine these together, once again, to give us as many opportunities to not only detect, but to prevent the exploits. And because we focus on the techniques and not the actual exploit, this works incredibly well for preventing zero-day exploits. And we most recently extended this to cover macOS. So we can cover a wide range of operating systems. We even have Android support in beta. We can log from traps into Panorama, which allows us to correlate endpoint with network activity. We can integrate with the W500, which is the WildFire appliance, for those of you who are unable to use our WildFire cloud, which, by the way, please use the WildFire cloud. Please, I'm asking you. Actually, the vast majority of you use the WildFire cloud, and I'll talk about it a little bit. From a scale perspective, it is unmatched. Now, not every attack goes to the endpoint. We've seen, when we look at this opportunity in the attack lifecycle for prevention, we assume that the attacks will go to the endpoint, and most do. Most attacks have to go through the network as well. But attackers have figured out, and this is an age-old technique, that if they can steal valid credentials and use those to log into the network, either from outside or from a compromised host on the inside, they can actually skip a significant number of those steps in the attack lifecycle. It's the easy button. Now, as hopefully most of you remember, with our announcement of 8.0 a few months ago, we added multiple protections for this kind of attack. We took our data scientists and had them build a machine learning model to detect the phishing pages. We built a new technique for identifying enterprise credentials flowing through our next-gen firewalls so that we could exert policy over where they should go, which is a relatively limited number of locations, and where they shouldn't go, so we can block that. But we know that we're not going to be able to prevent all credential theft. Even if we could prevent all credential theft on a go-forward basis, there are massive amounts of credentials floating around the internet already. And so we added a third capability, a policy-based multi-factor authentication capability. And I want to talk about that just a little bit extra today because I'm not sure that it was fully understood when we first talked about it. And it's very simple. The idea is if we, from a network security perspective, providing segmentation between users and the applications they're trying to access, if we could exert a policy-based multi-factor authentication challenge response and do that on a policy basis so you could customize it for each application the way that it should, but without requiring any changes to the application, we think we can neutralize credential theft. And here's a very simple example of how this works. Imagine a good user trying to access some application with intellectual property, perhaps source code, perhaps design specs, whatever. With this capability, we intercept that connection, we integrate with whatever identity and access management solution you already have, and we challenge back to the user. In this case, it's the good user. They succeed in the one-time authentication or multi-factor, and they're allowed access. Same example, but now with a compromised host. Whether this is an attacker outside the network or they have found a way to gain a foothold inside the network, and now they're trying to move laterally, it's very simple. They try to do the exact same thing. Only this time, when the multi-factor challenge response comes back, they don't have it. They're not the valid user. And the connection is denied. And not only is the connection denied, it's now logged. You now know that you have a compromised host, you now know you have compromised credentials, and you now have the next step to make sure this is remediated for the future. I urge all of you to take a look at what we've done with credential theft, and in particular, the policy-based multi-factor authentication capability we added. It's just one of many different things that are part of our security best practices. It's part of the capabilities we keep adding to the platform that we think are very relevant and important and add a lot of value. Now, a conversation about detecting new attacks and turning that into prevention would not be complete without talking about WildFire. And as has become tradition at Ignite, where I get to share with you the update on where we are with WildFire and the scale of it and the capability, we get to do it again today. But I want to walk through the history of WildFire with you. For those of you who've been on this journey with us since the beginning, I'd like to say thank you, because it has been fairly amazing. When WildFire was first released about 5.5 years ago, it basically looked like this. Our hardware devices could send unknown executable files up to a cloud where we would perform dynamic analysis, and if we found malware, we would create a signature. That signature was packaged up into content that was delivered every 24 hours. We thought it was pretty amazing, actually. About 100 of you did as well in that first year, I think. But it's grown. We've since extended the number of locations that connect into WildFire to include virtual and cloud and SaaS and endpoints and partners, and even the Cyber Threat Alliance, where our competitors are essentially sharing with us, and we are sharing with them. We've gone from executables to so many other file types, and even non-file types that can be sent up to the WildFire cloud. We've extended dynamic analysis to also include static analysis and machine learning, and most recently, we added bare metal analysis as well. All of that so we can create a growing number of protections, not just file-based protections, command and control, DNS, URL updates. And what once was about 1,000 a day is now about 230,000 protections per day, packaged up in content updates every 5 minutes. It has been remarkable how quickly this has grown. And one of the big benefits of this is the amount of data that we can collect in order to make it better. Since inception, WildFire has now processed 3.1 billion unique files. Thanks to all of you who use it on a regular basis. Those 3.1 billion unique files have produced over 1 trillion, that's a T, trillion artifacts. Artifacts like IP addresses, domain names, registry keys, things that with autofocus we can automatically correlate and track campaigns and track attackers in order to have a better understanding of how attacks are carried out, but also to then be able to automatically identify new indicators of compromise, which has now grown to about 350 million unique identifiers that have been automatically detected by being able to look through this amount of data, correlate everything we're seeing, and produce these protections. And these protections then become available to all of you to automatically push down to the infrastructure to provide prevention. And yet, even with all of that data, we recognize for sure we don't know everything, not even close. And because of that, about a year ago, we released a tool called MindMeld. MindMeld was developed basically as a mechanism for ingesting threat intelligence from other companies, other products, other sources, a rules-based engine for processing it to determine what to do with it, and then an output format. So you could actually do something with it for once, instead of just having a bunch of stuff that sits on the floor of a SOC. And then we did something unusual. We released it into GitHub. We made it open source. We made it available to all of you. Whether or not you're a customer of Palo Alto Networks, you can use MindMeld. And we did this with a purpose in mind. Partly because we thought it was important. We wanted to help out the security community, but also because we wanted your help. We wanted your help to build additional connectors. We had seeded the connectors with a certain number of threat intelligence feeds, but we needed your help, and you came through. Today, we have approximately 150 threat intelligence connectors that have been defined and are available to work with MindMeld. And for those of you who don't want to deploy open source, in your environment. We even integrate it with autofocus. So we will operate it for you, and you simply have to configure it. So we can combine everything that we know from a threat intelligence perspective with anything you know, or any of your suppliers, or any of your partners, or anyone in your industry. Now, not only is WildFire and autofocus, MindMeld, not only are these great examples of how we take detection and turn that into prevention at ever-increasing efficacy. These are also great examples of how scale, leverage, and agility can become attributes that work for us collectively, and not just things that work for the attacker. If you think about it, attackers increasingly have access to cheap compute. They certainly leverage each other, they share, they publish, and they move very quickly. So how do we take that advantage back from them? By leveraging it ourselves. And so I want to pick up a little bit where Nir left off with this diagram. We've taken what we've learned from WildFire and autofocus and applications like that, and as Nir described, we thought through what's made those so successful. And a big part of what's made them so successful is how easy they are to consume, how easy they are to simply turn up without having to deploy new infrastructure. And we thought through, what would it take to make that possible, not just with a whole new set of ideas that we at Palo Alto Networks have, but what if we could do this and deliver third-party applications in the same way? And so today, I get to announce two very important aspects of this vision that Nir described. And I start with the Palo Alto Networks logging service. And I understand that is a very utilitarian name. But this is a very utilitarian product. What does it do? It collects logs. Perhaps better description, it collects data. Lots of it, at very high rates, into a central location where we can then build applications on top of it. So this logging service, first and foremost, is really, really simple to turn on and use. We will take care of the operations of this infrastructure. For sure, it is designed to store massive amounts of data. Nir talked about terabytes, even petabytes of data for each one of you, not even collectively. And most importantly, it centralizes that data into a place where we can build and deliver new security applications. Even better, we designed it so that it integrates directly into Panorama. So you don't even have to learn a whole new set of tools. You continue to use Panorama for configuration management, reporting, and visualization. It's this that Panorama just gets a new logging source. And we designed it in such a way that you can combine it with existing logging sources you have, whether you've deployed log collectors or local log collection on the devices and virtual systems. Panorama will look at all different sources. So in a lot of ways, it simply runs in the background. And we know that for many of you, the US is great, but not all of you can send data to the US. And so at the time of launch, we will have a European data center as well. And this is real. It is in beta now, and we expect it to be available for all of you around August timeframe. Now, I think things like the logging service, particularly something that feels so utilitarian, probably should be shown. And so I'd like to show you just a couple of videos to highlight just how easy this service is to use. So let's start with the first video, guys. So here you see Panorama, as you've seen it before. Right there, there's a license. That's simple, 100 terabytes. There's a new plugin available. This is one of the capabilities of 8.0 is to have plugins, and you see the logging service is there. Successfully licensed, but not yet enabled. So we're going to go back to configuration, and we're going to enable it. Enabling takes a couple clicks. You need to enable it. And you'll notice there, we do this because we want to make sure that you explicitly select which location in the world and don't accidentally default to the location you don't want. Push the config. Have you ever deployed 100 terabytes of log storage before? That easily? What if 6 months later you had to double it? Imagine what that would take. That is so simple. All right. Now, you don't deploy logging just for the hell of it. You do it for a purpose. Now, there's lots of different purposes. We've talked about some applications and all sorts of things like that, but let me give you an example of something that I'm guessing happens probably on a weekly basis for almost everyone in this room. Your boss comes knocking on the door saying, hey, I just read about some new attack. Are we affected? What's your answer? Probably, I don't know. Let me find out. So let me show how easy that question can be to answer. Let's roll the second video, guys. All right, we're going to start an autofocus. Let's assume that it's a couple weeks ago and WannaCry is hitting the news. Let's do a search within autofocus. There we go, also known as WannaCryptor. This is Unit 42-based tag, so we have lots of information about it. We're just going to do a simple search. We found some samples. Let's click on the indicators here. And here you see a number of different indicators. We're going to go with the easy ones, the domains. There's 3. We'll add each of those to a remote search. Pretty simple to do. And we will initiate the remote search. There you see them again. My Panorama, search. Now let's flip over to the view from Panorama. There we go. And results will populate. That easy. Now, you might not be completely impressed. But that's because you don't know what happened in the background. While what I just showed you was happening, in the background, we had a logging service, single tenant, with about 90 terabytes of data, which, as you can see on the left, represents about 97 billion log records. We just searched all of them, and you see on the left-hand side, it took about half a second. It took half a second to look for those indicators in 97 billion records. And while we ran that search, we were ingesting 100,000 logs a second. That is the power of a cloud-native logging service that we just built. It is amazing. OK. Now again, we collect this data for a purpose. That was a simple example. But I want to go back to the same chart that I showed before and talk about the third-party applications that can be built on top of this data that we are collecting. Now, as Nir mentioned, there's lots of different applications, different kinds of applications that could be built. And I'm not going to walk through all the details today. But I thought what might be useful is to describe an end-to-end use case of how you might combine multiple applications together to do something useful and important. And I thought it might be helpful in this use case to not only use Palo Alto Networks applications, but to describe some third-party applications. And so to do that, I need to explain a few applications, a few vendors that have already committed to building applications in this framework. Now, what's common about these 3 applications, these 3 vendors, they're very cool. they're innovative, and they're small. Many of you may not have even heard of them. Some of you have heard of them and thought, I'll wait a few years. I'll let them mature. But that's what we're trying to change with this framework. Why wait if you need the technology? Recorded Future doing some very interesting things around threat intelligence. Phantom doing some amazing things around automation. ProtectWise doing some really just cool visualization and forensics capabilities. But let's see how we can combine these into an end-to-end use case. So again, we'll start with the framework. And we'll start with LightCyber, detecting a new attack based on the behavioral analytics and logging that security event back into the logging service. MindMeld picking that up as a trigger and searching other sources that MindMeld has access to correlate that information, which then kicks off a third process to Recorded Future to understand what they know about those indicators of compromise, building risk scores and additional information, additional context, which then kicks off yet another application, in this case Phantom, to then automate the prevention of this attack. And in addition, kicking off a fifth application, in this case ProtectWise, to provide visualization of everything that just happened for your SOC analysts to reduce the amount of time and effort it takes for them to carry out their work. This is a very powerful end-to-end use case, and even in this example, we've only scratched the surface of what each of these 5 applications can actually do. So imagine what will be possible. And imagine what will be possible with all of these vendors that have also committed to building applications on this framework. Large companies, small companies. Some of you in the room in specialized verticals are on this list. Competitors are on this list. We're embracing them, mostly. Kind of. No, we are. Because it's important. If they can build something that is beneficial to you, that's great. So let's hear from a few of them.
One of the biggest challenges that we see in security today is that the enterprises are suffocating from the volume and velocity of security alerts. We surveyed 125 enterprises and found that 75% of them admit to routinely ignoring security alerts. The typical large enterprise has 20, 30, 40 security tools and a whole room full of people just to manage them. Phantom solves this problem by automating and orchestrating security operations. We allow your security team to elevate their capabilities by automating the standard operating procedures that they execute on a regular basis every day. We're able to integrate with Palo Alto Networks products, including the firewalls, traps, WildFire, and others, as well as third-party partners that are part of the application framework launch here today. With Phantom on the Palo Alto Networks application framework, we're able to provision and deploy Phantom's security automation and orchestration platform right out of the box. This is the first time that we've seen an enterprise-level full security application stack that's easily deployable in the cloud. If you want to learn more about Phantom, feel free to check out our free community edition on the Phantom website today.
The problem that we sort of focused on a little over 4 years ago when we founded the company is that complex threats execute over long periods of time. And what we thought was missing was really this memory for the network. If we had a memory, we could extend that time period and really go back in time, really create a time machine for threat detection where we can automate this process of analysis and understanding of what's happening in these environments. So we're really excited to partner with Palo Alto Networks in rolling out the application framework and taking advantage of the full Palo Alto Networks platform. We see this as a phenomenal win, not only from a visibility perspective, customers will have the ability to bring the detections already made within the different Palo Alto Networks products into the full ProtectWise platform. And they'll be able to do this without the prerequisite of having to deploy ProtectWise sensors. So it's going to be a phenomenally cost-efficient as well as powerful exercise to really outline and understand what's happening in their networks over long periods of time. We think that this is phenomenally powerful, and we're excited to be part of the launch of the application framework.
So we need to get out ahead of the curve. We need to be able to figure out threats before they hit us. And so what Recorded Future is trying to do is to enable security teams and network operators to get out ahead of the curve. Recorded Future supercharges either the human analyst or the existing security infrastructure by collecting large amounts of intelligence and turn that into actionable intelligence that can be provided to the user, the network operator, the threat intel analyst, or the actual security infrastructure. We can feed our data in there. By integrating with the Palo Alto Networks application framework, we can enable the integration of intelligence with customers' own data and actually figuring out that golden sort of connection between what's happening externally with what's happening to the customer's own network and enabling that rapid connection between the external world and the internal. We're super excited about bringing Recorded Future's vast intelligence collections to the Palo Alto Networks application framework. We truly believe that by bringing our external intelligence with the customer's own network data into this framework, we're going to enable security teams to get out ahead of the curve. And we're super excited about rolling this out later this year.
All right. We're not done there, though. Today, we're also announcing a $20 million venture fund to fund other ideas beyond which we've already talked about today, to build on top of this application framework, to turn into a thriving ecosystem. And we expect to team with two of Silicon Valley's absolute best venture capitalists, both Sequoia and Greylock, in order to do this. All right. Magic? A little bit? All right. We're not quite done, though. I mentioned at the start, if you can't consistently apply everything in this security framework to every location, you create seams, and you create these seams that attacks get through. And this used to be relatively easy. And I say used to be, this is probably like 20 years ago. But at some point in time, this might have been easy. You had a headquarters. You gave desktop computers to people so they couldn't take them out of the building. You had a data center, might have sat right next to your headquarters. You built a wall around it. You had a very nice perimeter. Called it a day. That is not what things look like today. You still have all of that stuff. But increasingly, you consume applications as SaaS. You deploy your applications not just in your data center, but up in the cloud. You have increasing numbers of remote locations, remote networks, and your users are everywhere, like you are today, with laptops and mobile devices. And so how do you consistently apply that security capabilities everywhere that you need to? We understand this isn't necessarily easy, but it is imperative. And today I'd like to focus primarily on the branch offices, the remote networks, the mobile users that have been particularly challenging to try to get under the security framework, because they're all over the place. Now, there's different approaches to this. One of the most common is the backhaul approach. You take your branch offices, you probably pay extraordinary amounts of money for very small amounts of throughput in order to use MPLS to connect them back to your network. Low throughput, very expensive. High quality service, as long as you don't need that many applications. Because of that, many of you have employed split tunneling. You only send some of the traffic back, and the rest you send out to the internet. And then you hope. You hope that nothing bad happens. Now, it's faster, it's cheaper, it's not very secure. And some of you do the full stack approach. You take everything that you need in the central sites, you package it up, and you ship it out to the branch offices. Secure, but really not the most operationally efficient way to do things. Now, what if you could take the full stack? What if it could perform at very high throughput? And what if it was very operationally efficient? That's what we built. Today, we're announcing the Global Protect cloud service. Everything we do from a security perspective, delivered as a service from the cloud so that you don't have to go deploy everything all over the world. Very simply, you connect these remote networks and these mobile users into the centralized cloud infrastructure. And that is where the security enforcement takes place, instead of trying to distribute it out to every remote user in every remote network. And you still manage this with Panorama. So you can have consistent policy applied both to your on-prem deployments as well as this new cloud service. It has all the same security capabilities of PanOS that you're used to using, so you don't have to compromise on security. It supports hybrid architectures, so you can leverage locations you have, plus this service, and use them interchangeably as best suits your needs. It automatically scales for whatever capacity you need, wherever you need it in the world. And, like the logging service, it is in beta now with target availability in August. And with this service, think of the use cases. Think of these mobile users. And instead of having to deploy all of your own infrastructure globally in order to make sure they have a great user experience, you simply connect them into this new Global Protect cloud service. And you do the same thing for your remote networks. You simply connect them into this cloud service, and security is delivered from the cloud. And for those of you who have already advanced your remote network deployments using things like SD-WAN, you can tie that into this as well. Continue to use the SD-WAN technology for what it's great for, but connect it into this cloud service to make sure you get the necessary security and protections for these locations. In fact, we're announcing a number of SD-WAN partners today as well. They have done the integration work to make sure that this picture will work for all of you as well. And, like any good cloud service, there is a shared responsibility model behind this. We will take care of the DevOps. We will take care of operating this infrastructure for you. Because we can centralize that. We have the expertise in doing that. We've built the automation, and we can evolve it. We will keep it updated, both with software as well as with content. We will monitor and make sure it's available, freeing you up to do what you need to do, which is essentially the security operations and the security policy management in this environment, through the same tools you're used to using with Panorama. And of course, all of this is tied into the logging service, which then ties it into the application framework. such that all of the new applications that are being built on top of it will apply not only to your central sites and your cloud deployments, but will also apply to all of your remote networks and mobile users consistently as well. All right. So, it's interesting. About 3 or 4 months ago, we had the biggest launch in the company's history with 8.0. But security can't stand still. Innovation has to continue. And today I talked through just a few of the really important security innovations we've done around prevention, particularly focused on zero-day prevention or prevention of attacks we've never seen before. We talk about this vision for how we can deliver new security applications without having to deploy more infrastructure and disrupting that whole model of security consumption. And to make sure that this can be applied in all locations, we've even simplified that. We've allowed it to be consumed as a service, leveraging the cloud so you can have consistent security, the entire framework applied everywhere in your infrastructure.